Welcome to the Radical Lifestyle Podcast, brought to you by Generation to Generation, where you will be inspired by the past, equipped for the present, and prepared for the future as we engage in conversations with people from around the world. Hello everyone, this is Andrew and Daphne from Generation to Generation, and our guest today is Yotam Dagan. Now, Yotam, for people that don't know who you are, can you just say a bit about where you're from and what you do?
Hello, everyone. It's great being with you. My name is Yotam Dagan. I'm a retired commander, former Israeli Navy SEAL, who became a psychologist, a clinical psychologist. And I have been helping people with post-traumatic stress disorder for many years. One of them is myself. I am Israeli, born and raised on a kibbutz in Israel. And today I live in the northern part of Israel.
And people are going to listen to this because we're going to be talking through some of the things you write about in a book. And so for people that hear this, they say, you know what, I want to find out more about him. I want to find this book. I want to get it. We recommend people do. Where can they do that?
So my new book, A Time to Kill, A Time to Heal, an Israeli Navy SEAL's journey, is coming out these days, literally end of 2020. And will be on Amazon, and you could get it anywhere.
Okay, perfect. I will put links in the description, so for people listening, go check out the links and get this book. There's a lot for us all to learn through this.
Oh yeah.
In our own lives, this isn't just about a Navy SEAL's there are principles here that all of us can learn from and take from. And you being a clinical psychologist is kind of the tail end of that book. So we want to go back to the beginning. And so for people listening, can you just give a bit of your background, where you grew up? What was it like growing up in that area?
So I was born on an Israeli kibbutz called Ma'agan Michael. It's on the Mediterranean coast of Israel, about halfway between Haifa and Tel Aviv. And a childhood that was full of wonder, a very, very cohesive society, very idealistic at the time. As children, we were raised in the children's house, like dormitories, away from our parents. Actually, I left my home, my parents' home, when I think I was about a few hours old.
Wow.
And it was beautiful, but it was a modern Sparta, preparing us to become soldiers in the quest for Israel's independence and nation building. When I was 11 years old, I survived a terrorist attack. A group of Palestinian terrorists came with rubber boats from a mothership. They wanted to land at the beaches of Tel Aviv, but the high seas took them to the north to where I was. And I was hiding in the bush and survived. Many people were killed in that attack. At age 15, I became the trained sniper on the kibbutz SWAT team, Special Weapons and Tactics team, because we had to be ready should another attack like this happen. And at 18, I joined the Israeli Navy SEALs, Shayetet 13, or the 13th Flotilla, and I became head of an underwater demolition team. And a few years into that, I actually closed a circle of destiny by stealthily diving into a Lebanese port where another mothership with rubber boats and a lot of ammunition and weapons was ready to launch another deadly attack against my people, against my home, and we managed to stop it by blowing that ship up.
Wow. And what were the consequences of that terrorist attack as a child? How did that affect you?
So I think that it affected me in many ways, some of which I became aware many years later. First of all, imagine that you live in this very, very peaceful place, the sea, the beach, the fish ponds where we were growing fish, and totally free, totally wandering around. And all of a sudden, there's this near-death experience, which was obviously very, very frightening. And all of a sudden, my childhood, sanctuary became a frontier. So on that note, you go to sleep at night and you're afraid that someone would attack you, like it happened a few weeks ago or a few years ago. So that was one, I would say, main effect. The other one, which I came to know years later, was that after that attack, the terrorists bypassed the kibbutz and they stopped a bus on the coastal road and drove it towards Tel Aviv, and they were stopped on the outskirts of Tel Aviv. And there was a massacre there with dozens of Israelis, whole families that perished there. And 2 days later, the Israeli Defense Forces launched the first attack against the south of Lebanon. And in those hostilities, a 20-year-old soldier named Reuven Ruvik Sarig was killed when his armored vehicle was hit by an IED, an improvised explosive device. And of course, I didn't know it at the time. I did not know him, but that was in 1978. And in 1985, I met his sister, Iris, who became my wife and the mother of our 4 boys. So
Wow.
this connection of, blood and family and terror and fighting is part of my story and part of my journey.
Mm.
As a phrase I read once, that some people, when given lemons, turn it into lemonade, and some people turn it into something sour. And certainly your childhood seems to have set you on a course in that, where negative things actually gave you a good foundation for your life or what was to come ahead of time. But before we get into anything too intense, please tell everybody the story of your ring.
So Iris and I met in 1985. We were going steady for quite a few years before we finally decided to make it formal and get married and have a family. And at that process, of course, I was by that time I was like a son to her parents. Their home became my home, and just before the marriage, her late father, gave us 2 rings, which coincidentally fit perfectly, one for me and one for her. And then he told us a story which until that time we have never heard. Ilse's father, Max, was born in Poland. And when the Second World War broke, he was 10 years old. They had a family of means, merchants, not far from the border with Russia. And when the Germans and the Soviets overtook Poland, they were actually deported to Siberia, him and his family. Just before they left home and just ran away, one of his uncles took an old clock, an old watch, golden watch that he actually got from his grandmother, and hid it in the sole of his shoe. They just kind of dug a hole in it and put it inside, and made sure that it could not be found. And for all those years in Siberia, which they hardly survived, the hunger and the cold and the plagues, it was hidden there. And when the war was over and they came back to Poland just to find that nothing was left of their home and of their wealth, they remembered that the watch was there, and they opened it. But because he stepped on it for so many years, for such a long time, the watch was completely squashed, squeezed, and it was just, there was nothing left of it except for some gold. So that gold was actually many years later melted and turned into wedding rings, who were Iris's parents, and they gave it to us, and we still wear them to this day. And I think that there's a lot of symbolism here, because it's, well, bad things happen, and the challenge is to not just bounce back, but bounce forward, and to build to build good things and strong things from what you've gone through. And I think that this watch that was obviously ruined, but then created something out of it that was, is so powerful in the form of our family. And this is something that I will definitely want to pass on to my sons.
Yeah.
The phrase came to me when you were saying, and then you said this was melted, it went through fire, and I thought people are refined through fire and suffering, and that ring symbolises both the fire and the suffering, that it was refined in order to give you your ring. A beautiful story.
Yeah.
Beautiful
symbol of
story.
the bond and bond between you. Wow.
So then you decided to go and be a Navy SEAL, and can you give people a glimpse into the training? One phrase you said, the sense, the only good day was yesterday, which I thought
was yesterday.
yeah. So the only easy day was yesterday. So can you tell us something? I mean, there was the 7-minute runs, there's the sleeplessness, there's so many things, but can you tell us a few stories about what this training involved?
So Navy SEALs, first of all, the name of the Israeli unit which I served in is Shayetet 13, or the 13th Flotilla. In the United States, the Navy SEALs are our sister unit. SEALs is actually an acronym, stands for Sea, Air, Land. So we're amphibious, underwater, from the water, on land, through air, everything. And that means that the training is long. It's very, very, very hard. And it has to get you to a situation in which, under all circumstances, you can deliver. You can go out there and fight and get the mission done when it's cold, when it's painful, when there's an enemy, so being a soldier, ground, infantry, special forces on the ground is hard. You have to carry a lot of weight. You have to walk long distances and carry a lot of things and do very, very complex mission. Here we have all that, but we also have the sea, and the water is cold, and the sea has its currents and winds, and nothing is constant. It's changing all the time. So you need to develop a very, very special situational awareness of all of the time knowing where you are, what's happening around you, and then being on top of that as you go out and perform your missions. So in order to achieve this goal, first of all, we have to make sure that we have the right stuff. We have to get the right people to the unit. And then there's a long training phase in which many of them do not stay because it's too hard for them, or it's just they just do not fit. So they need to move to serve in another unit. It starts as regular infantry training, and then comes the naval part. The first part, the BUDS training, which is it's like a 3-4 months period in which very little sleep, a lot of physical training, and the long runs and long swims, and that's before even we start diving, just to kind of get acquainted to this new environment. And sometimes it's finding that determination and stamina and even enough aggressiveness to be able to cock your AK-47 Kalashnikov rifle when your fingers are actually frozen. So you can't really grip. You don't have the grip, and those things are very, very hard. And at any given moment, one can say, "This is not for me. I want to go home," and you're home, but you can't go back to the unit. So many of my friends could not stay there and just left. Some of them were found to not fit the unit. They just could not become Navy SEALs. And out of a group of over 70, we graduated. There were 13 of us. Wow. So,
and us being generation to generation are very interested in the influence between generations, and maybe some of your own story led you down this path, but also we read about the impact of your grandmother. And can you talk to us a bit about her and the influence her story had on yours? And for people listening that have been to Israel with us, we take them to this place called the Ayalon Institute. And so a lot of them will recognize this place as you share this story. But it's a very powerful place to go to, a very powerful story to hear about. And we were excited when we saw about your grandmother's story and her roots from the Ayalon Institute. So can you share some about that story and the impact it had on you as well?
Yes, so growing on the kibbutz, in the children's house, with my parents very close by physically, but emotionally they were doing other things. And it was tough. It was tough because somehow I had to mature and grow and survive emotionally this very, very harsh reality in terms of, I mean, nothing was missing on the physical side, and it was a very enriching and a childhood full of very cool things that we did. But on the emotional side, you know, children need someone to connect to be attached to. And to me, the main figure was my grandmother, Judith Kramer Ayalon, who was born in Riga just after the turn of the 20th century, and came to Israel, emigrated to Israel she was a teenager. Her father was killed on a terrorist attack in Haifa during the Arab Rebellion in the 1929, I think. And then she was part of the Scouts movement, and with her classmates, they decided to to form a new kibbutz, to start a new kibbutz. And when they were getting ready for that mission, just before Israel's War of Independence from 1946 to 1948, they were situated on a small hill near the city of Rehovot, in a place where today the Ayalon Institute, you could take your groups to visit. And they worked, and they were pioneers, agriculture, doing things like that. But there was a secret, a very, very big secret, very well kept, that underneath that hill, there was an underground factory that manufactured 9mm rounds for Sten submachine guns, the British Sten submachine guns, which the Israeli underground at the time, the Haganah, used. And they knew that the War of Independence would break out soon, and they needed this ammunition. So during the British mandate of Eretz Israel, they did that without being discovered, and they actually had a lot of sacrifice. My mother at the time was a very small girl, and she was out there playing. She had no idea. And my grandmother and my grandfather worked there. And after the war was over in 1949, they formed Kibbutz Magan Michael, and they moved from that place. And for many years, it was abandoned until it was kind of rebuilt, rehabilitated, and turned into a museum, which she used to come with groups and tell the story until her death a few years ago, after she was 90 plus. To me, she was grandmother. She was a very special woman. She loved nature, and she taught me a lot of things about the birds and the fish and the flora and fauna of the area, but also something about courage and about the ability to control the emotions. She wasn't very touchy-feely, but she was always there for me. And one story that I did not witness because I was too young, I think a few months after I was born, the Israeli submarine Dakar that actually sailed out of Portsmouth towards Israel, it was I think 1968, disappeared at sea. And my mother's brother, my uncle, was supposed to be on that submarine. When the news came, and she said, okay, we'll just have to do what the Brits do, drink a cup of tea and breathe deeply and wait to see what happens. And after a few days, it turned out that he was on the other submarine. He was just moved to the other submarine at the last moment. So he survived. But that was who she was, very, very powerful and strong. And she was one of the founders of the Israeli Society for the Protection of Nature. So she talked about the environment way before it was such a trendy issue that everyone talks about like today.
What a heritage. What a heritage. But I noticed it in reading all the way through your book, but I pulled out a bit about your grandmother. And you talk about the Ayalon Institute, named after the biblical valley of Ayalon. And then you go into the story of Joshua. Now, Joshua was, what, 4,000 years ago? Something like that. And and it struck me through this book that I don't know of another nation. I mean, there may be, but I've travelled to 40 and I haven't seen this in other nations, where you can't tell your own story without telling Israel's story. That you talking, and we've had conducted several podcasts with Israelis, with Jewish people. The past comes into the future almost very naturally. That was just an observation I had. We love it. But
and I would only add to that, I think it was the late Shimon Peres, the president, and he was a dreamer. He once said that, that the people, Israelis, or the people of Israel, we are rooted, our grounds are rooted into history,
yeah.
And our head and our sight is into the future of nanotechnology and things like that. And that's where we are. We are at the crossroads of our history and our future, with the present always being, it's the present is like a place where you could put your stick and kind of use it as a leverage, in order to leverage where we come from to where we want to get. And I think this is the only way that we can not just survive, but actually thrive in this very hostile, neighborhood that we live in.
Yeah. So, can we talk about decision making? Because this is something that struck me. And people listening do get this book. I was gripped by it. I was reading it late at night, and I was gripped by it.
And I think about our own lives and our own situations that we've gone through, and apply what he was talking about to those situations, although they pale in comparison to the situations that you were going through.
Definitely.
But there is so much to take from it and apply to your own lives.
So I just got a couple of quotes I've pulled out about decision making. I hope I've pulled them out appropriately. We're great believers in leaving everything in context, so you'll have to put it back if I've taken it out. Never listen to those inner voices at the peak of an unbearable situation. Endure till you reach a break and catch your breath. Hold on until the end of the hour, the day, the week. Think again and reconnect to your internal determination. And I thought, how many of us think that in a crisis we've got to make a decision? I've got to get out of it. I'm changing course.
And it's often something we say to people when they come to us in a crisis, saying, "What should we do?" And we say, "Wait until the crisis is over, then make your decision."
Because there's good crises and bad crises,
right.
Things can end up. And then another quote which links in, the way the human memory works under stress and underwater is not the same as in everyday events. The brain's ability to retrieve the memory required to perform a task in a new or different setting is not as straightforward as one might think. And I thought both of those are about context. So can you talk to us all about this whole thing about decision making, what you learn, how you help people today? Because the whole world is in crisis at the minute. The whole world is in trauma, really, from what's going on. And so this is very relevant to, I think, most people listening.
So one of the, I think that one thing that kind of defines a crisis situation, an emergency situation, a stressful situation, is that it's very hard to see the big picture. We have a tendency to enter what is sometimes called a tunnel vision.
Yeah.
Not just the vision, but a psychological tunnel vision. It's all about the here and now. It's very hard to see the context. It's interesting. You were talking about the context. The context is lost under those extreme situations, and then we have to make decisions. And we tend to forget that there was a before and that there will be an after, because we're just embedded in the impossible situation. And it's very, very important to, that's what we train our special forces operators to get acquainted with those situations and to say, okay, there are a few things that are at my service, at my disposal, that could help me do the right thing, survive, and then take it to the next level. So there are a few, I will try to kind of dissect it. One is the issue of the will, because sometimes, none of us have chosen that COVID-19 would hit the world, and we just got it, and we just have to deal with it until, the vaccines start working, and hopefully there's going to be a positive and new tomorrow. But sometimes people make a choice to enter a war zone. I mean, you're smiling, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You found yourself in the Ivory Coast and in other places. And not just, I mean, some people are looking for trouble, but some people are looking to do good things and to fix trouble.
Yeah.
And I found myself, and I still find myself, time and again, making that informed choice of getting into a war zone, of getting into, even if there's an automobile accident on the highway and you stop because you want to go and help. So you know that you're entering a situation that might be unbearable and impossible. And the first things that usually happen is people ask themselves, when it gets hard, when it gets painful, that I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I want to go, I want to walk away. And by the way, most people do walk away. But when you have a mission that is valuable, when you out there, you need to go and save lives of people or help people in extreme situations, that tendency to walk away is very, very strong. And when I write about connecting to the internal willpower, and this is what I mean, many times people ask me, how do I go to the boot camp and how do I succeed in getting accepted to the Israeli Navy SEALs or to other units? And the only words of wisdom that I can give them is never listen to those inner voices, because when it's painful and it's cold and you're thirsty and your muscles ache, you convince yourself that you don't want this and you walk away, only to discover later that you actually want to, but then it's too late. So one thing is, it's not detachment. It's just saying, okay, I know that those voices are in there. I will honor them, but I will not listen to them. And it's easier. It's much easier said than done. And the second thing about decision making is that try to get out of that tunnel vision, see the big picture, and always look for the opportunity that might be embedded in the situation. Because when we look at Israel, it's 72, almost 73 years since our independence, all those wars, all those terrorist attacks, a lot of bad things that have happened. And still we learn, we move forward, we grow, and we thrive. And this, in order to get there, one needs to know how to manage those situations. And managing crisis situations are about making the right decisions, but also connecting with the people at eye level and showing them a way forward. Because many times, there are so many problems that you cannot fix, but you can acknowledge the pain and the suffering, and you can reignite the hope. And I think that is so important in those situations, because at the end of the day, I mean, life is about bad things that happen and how you grow out of them. And there will be no vaccine to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You talk about sort of listening to that determination, that inner determination to overpower the other voices that are telling you to give up, walk away, go get the drink when you're thirsty. Could you maybe give some principles that maybe you learn in the training that help you in those times of crisis to be able to try and think as clearly as you can to help with your decision making?
Yes. So first of all, not just that the only easy day was yesterday, but you have to take it a minute at a time, an hour at a time, a day at a time. And you must, I mean, I know it might sound a little bit weird, but celebrate your small successes and acknowledge that they are there, because at the darkest hours, just before dawn hits, it's very hard to actually believe that dawn will break and come. And so we need to remind ourselves those things. Second thing, when you can, when you can, you need to take care of yourself, self-care. So sometimes, I mean, I've been working with leaders in the municipalities in Israel and in other places in Europe and in the United States on how to manage crisis situations. And one of the things that I talk about usually is that, when you're sitting, when the mayor of a town or a city who's in charge of the lives of millions or hundred thousands of people, and they have to make sure that there's electricity and water and all the services and medical services, and there's an earthquake or a hurricane or some kind of an attack, a terrorist attack or whatever it is. I always tell them, you need to care for everyone, but like when you're flying on a commercial jet, we used to do that a few months ago when the skies were open, and you have that the air stewards briefing you about the oxygen masks. So before you help someone sitting near you with the oxygen mask, you have to put on your own, meaning that you have to make sure that you have all the necessary and available resources that you need in order to stay clear in your thoughts and your cognitive processes. And the problem is that, when we do not get sleep, when we're dehydrated or hungry, or when we have a headache or some kind of a sickness or a fever, our physical state affects our emotional state. So we become angry and we become impulsive, and that in turn affects our cognitive abilities. And that's where we make very bad decisions. And sometimes the decision should be, handing over the steering wheel to your deputy and say, I'm going to get 2 hours of sleep, I'll be back. Or I need something to drink, a cup of tea, or, well, whatever you drink on your island, or coffee. But at the same time, don't let a bad decision of not doing that escalate your physical state, to escalate your emotional state, and then there's a magic circle that is not a good one, and that gets us into very, very bad decisions that are made. So basically what I usually do when I mentor or train or coach leaders, I tell them, listen to yourself, manage your own stress levels, make sure that you have the coping resources that you need, so then you can help others and get your mission done. And at the same time, be aware of what's going on around you, not just with yourself, but with the situation. So situational awareness and knowing how to manage those stress levels is very, very important.
Of course, I read of a dilemma, and I thought, oh my goodness, how do you manage this? Because we're all value-based. We all have values that drive our decision-making, that drive our behaviours. But then in the book you said this, but values are often put to the test. They collide with other values in the face of a difficult decision, choosing one value over another. So when your own values are colliding and you're having to choose between values, that almost feels like pushing your back against the wall.
Well, the truth is that many times life creates those situations, because it's very easy to adhere to a value, to stick to them, to behave if there's not a problem. But sometimes, our values are put into test when two values collide. And one, I think that you're referring to, what I've written about in my book, is that when we were training our soldiers to dive, warriors to dive, and combat diving is a very, very, it's tough. You have to be very physically fit, breathing through a closed circuit oxygen rebreather, and it's very different. It's not like scuba diving in the beautiful, Red Sea and seeing corals and things like that. You fight with that rebreather, and after a few hours underwater, it's cold and dark and damp, and it's very hard to control. And the problem is that one value is stamina, determination. Go out there, get the job done against all odds. That was, by the way, that was the product of a few unsuccessful missions that my unit, executed years before I came in. And because there was not enough stamina So, that was a traumatic event to the unit. So we were trained to just go all the way. But the problem is that if you do not stop at the right time, you might lose your consciousness and drown and die and get killed. So it's, the value of human life that we don't want to risk, especially not in training, but also in the operational work, vis-a-vis the value of, go all the way, complete your mission, no matter what. So we were all wrestling with those two values colliding all the time, especially in the more advanced parts of our dive training. And to me, what happened was that I was sitting there in my office as a chief instructor in the Shayetet, in the Israeli Navy SEALs unit, and I was authorizing one of those very, very difficult dive scenarios. And I asked the team leaders, how are you going to brief your soldiers when to stop a dive? Because there are two values that are colliding, and they didn't have a good answer to that. And all of a sudden, it kind of came to me. It clicked that so one value is determination, get the job done. The other is stay alive. But a third value of caring for each other could actually make the difference. And so what I told them was that as any diver in the dire situation of not being able to control his breath, and when it becomes very, very dangerous and his consciousness is kind of wandering, should ask himself not if he can go on, but what happened if his buddy, the other diver, loses consciousness? Is he in a good enough position and physical situation to conduct what we call the emergency procedure of saving the life of his buddy, getting them to the surface and resuscitating them if needed? If the answer is yes, go on diving. If the answer is no, just stop at that moment and call it a day. Because to me, the solution to this dilemma between two colliding values was to introduce a third value that would actually kind of give the, turn that pendulum that moves between one to the other into the straight and very, very, I think, clear what to do. And
so this is me just maybe wrongly analysing this too, but how your buddy is probably how you are. And so was that externalising your own situation so that you could almost see what decision you need to make because you've externalised it in the form of your buddy?
I would say that using the responsibility that one has towards one's buddy, right, okay, as a gauge to am I fit or am I not fit? It does two things. First of all, it shifts and focuses your responsibility on your mate, and then it kind of facilitates this baptism of fire and water and everything. But at the same time, it also conveys a very important message that we are here for each other and we have each other's back.
Right.
We talk a lot about that, but this is not a theoretical question. It just happens, and you have to decide.
Yeah. So a huge part that stood out to me in all this is the dissociation or the detachment. That, and maybe in a minute you could explain to people listening what that is before we go on. But I want to read 3 quotes really from your book on this. Based on my early childhood on the kibbutz and the defense mechanisms I developed, I quickly relearnt the art of detachment, entering a state of being that had little room for feelings or emotions. So there, right, is the seeds of this in your childhood, which may seem negative, but are equipping you for the future. And then you're talking about the diving, and we put a lot of effort into detaching ourselves from the hard and painful here and now in anticipation of reaching our goal, becoming a Navy SEAL. So there it is, something you almost put an effort into later on. And then the third quote I took out was, when you're a fighter endangering your life, these defense mechanisms are almost as important as your bulletproof Kevlar vest. You cannot function as a warrior if you are scared to death. And I thought it's really interesting that this, which is kind of, dissociation, which is usually seen, oh, this is a bad thing, and that has many dynamics to it in your life. And I found that really interesting. Would you like to talk to us about that?
And taking care of your mental state being as important as the weapons that you have to use as well.
Yeah, so I will start just by saying that over the last few years, I've been doing a lot of work on resilience training with first responders, emergency medical teams, firefighters, police officers in the UK, in the US, and in other places. And it always kind of strikes me, across places around the earth and across professions, most of us, and I'm saying us because I put myself in the same boat as those people who risk their lives to save other people's lives, okay? And they all use this mechanism of emotional detachment. You kind of detach yourself from the situation and you try to not feel anything while you're doing your work. And imagine a paramedic that has to intubate a patient with a heart attack, and they have to, do all the CPR, the procedure of resuscitation, etc. And if they mistake, the person dies, and it's just straightforward. And many of them, when they're on the job, they are detached emotionally, and they somehow learn how to do it or bring it from home. I studied it at a very, very young age. Most of them get it a little bit later. And then there are two questions that needs to be asked about this emotional detachment. One, what is the price that one pays emotionally for using it for too much, for an extended period of time when you have your own family and your own kids and you can't feel anything? How could you, how could you stay in a relationship, and how could you become a caring parent and emotionally present for the well-being of your children? That's one question. And the second question is, when does it not work? Because when I served as a psychologist in the Israeli Navy SEALs unit, occasionally one of the warriors would come to consult with me with problems at home, relationships. Some of them had some issues. And as a psychologist, I'm supposed to kind of take apart those defense mechanisms and help them put them back together like a Lego building blocks. But I can't, because they need it. They cannot go out there and perform on missions if they're afraid to death, or even if they're not emotionally detached as they should be. So the answer is, what I've learned over the years is that, you have to, I learned that I need to honor those defense mechanisms, but also find a way around them. And at the same time, build the resiliency of those individuals, helping them become more flexible, knowing when to detach and when not to detach. Because the truth is that stress piles up all the time. It's like those Tetris games that falls from the sky. And eventually, when you look at the suicide rates of first responders in the US, and I think also in the UK, it's staggering. I mean, 4 times more than the normal population. And the problem is that if you don't learn how to bend, you break. So it can work only to a certain degree. And the other thing that I learned is that we can be detached. I mean, first responders can detach themselves very, very well, but there are 2 situations that it never works. One, when there's someone a colleague, a friend, a family member who is in a bad situation and you have to help them. That is when the emotional detachment would not work. And the other is when small children are involved. That's when the paramedics and the doctors, that's when it's very, very hard for them, because it just touches us it's like an exposed nerve in our nervous system. We just can't handle this. So going back to my military years, again, it's something that you cannot do without. But to me, helping veterans, helping those who have been there, and then they finish the military service and they go to the next phases of their lives, they have to reconnect with their internal emotions, and they have to learn how to experience love and to experience companionship and trust, because otherwise it would never work. And for some of us, and it doesn't have to be full-blown post-traumatic stress disorder. Just by, this metal that is forged into steel in the fire and the water and the battle, some of us have issues and need help in order to get back to life.
Yeah. You mentioned the two scenarios where it doesn't work. I guess it's a bit like if your family member is having surgery and you're a surgeon, you can't do it because there's an emotional connection there. You have to have someone who's disassociated from that relationship. And talk about, with children, and this may be a little off, but can you talk, because in Israel, you often have a scenario you're faced with where children are used against Israel in combat, in terrorism. And so you'll have soldiers and people having to face the reality of having to deal with kids that maybe are strapped in suicide vests, or so maybe could you speak to that? How do you help people deal with that scenario? Because in Israel, that's not an unusual situation.
So the scenario, the situation in Israel, and the Israeli Arab or the Israeli Palestinian conflict has been going on for 120 strong years. It's probably not going to end soon, and it's just something that we need to manage and live with. And the truth is, the basic truth is, beyond the different narratives and the different sides and who started and who, I'm not going to go into that, but the basic fact is that it's an ongoing tragedy. On both sides. I believe that those kids who are being abused by their own community, by their own society, are victims. Not and I've done I did some research analyzing suicide bombers survivors, some of which were in their early teens, and you could see very, very disturbed individuals with various types of personality disorders and not functioning in many, many ways, that were actually sent to become shaheeds, to become martyrs, and on part of their war and against Israel, and instead of helping them, giving them mental health that support that they need, were sent to their death. Many of them were killed and killed many Israelis. Some of them survived and then came in and out of our prisons. And to me, so there's that side that needs to be acknowledged, because people in Gaza and in other places are suffering from this conflict, and that has to be said. And as a psychologist, I've worked not just with Jewish Israeli communities, but also with Arab, Muslim, and Christian communities in Israel and in other places. Regarding our own soldiers, our own citizens. So again, this is the ecosystem that we live in. There is no fast, easy, magical solution. And the way that we get or overcome, or try to overcome as much as we can the situation, is to be very, very, very accountable and surgical in what we do. We want to get the bad guys, not the uninvolved, the children, the women, those who are trapped, even when they are used as human shields against our soldiers. We need to make sure that on the ethical side, we do not conduct anything that might be considered as a war crime, and we do not. And again, on both sides, occasionally things happen. We have to acknowledge that sometimes when your colleague was shot in front of you or was hit by a stone on the head, and the rage is out there, it's very, very hard to control it. But that's how we educate our soldiers. And I've risked my life more than once in many very, very dangerous battle scenarios, where my main mission was to save the lives of Palestinians and Israelis.
Yeah. For anybody who's interested, we did a documentary called Quest for Truth, where we took 11 young people from 7 nations to look at this, and there's a whole section on it where they talk to the IDF and this whole thing about the code of conduct that every IDF soldier holds, and it was really, really, really eye-opening. But Sophie, a lot happened to you. I mean, we talked about this in terms of other people, but this was your own journey too. What you're talking about is not just about others, it's your own journey. Of course, there's the whole issue of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, but you took, and there's 2 quotes I want to read from the book, where you took something that was very negative on yourself and turned it around in order to be able to help others. And I think often people do this, that they redeem their own story by helping others. One was this: the accident was so horrific, so much so that I was unable to talk about it. It was too devastating. Feelings of guilt flooded over me for not being able to prevent it. And it led to a focus on safety, especially during training and responsibility as a trainer. So this situation you took, and as I read it, you said, but how can I ensure this doesn't happen to others? How can we turn this around? And then about training to be the psychologist, you said, and I thought this was very insightful, and probably many people might be able to relate to this in other ways. In hindsight, I now know that the choice to become a clinical psychologist and to work with traumatized soldiers was highly connected to my own journey to recovery and healing. The younger, uneducated version of me, a Navy SEAL, holding a knife between his teeth, somehow knew that the best way to help myself would be to help others. Wow, what a turnaround. What a turnaround that can also give hope to other people.
Well, it's interesting because, again, it was not just written in hindsight, it was understood in hindsight, because there were some things that I just did because I had the feeling that was the right thing to do. And again, I think that the fastest way to learn is to teach others. And I think probably the only way to heal psychologically is to help others who are dealing with same issues. I mean, that it worked for me. And there are 2 things two comments that I want to add about this. One is that the name Nathan, or Natan in Hebrew, which is actually written Nun Taf Nun, which is the 3 letters in Hebrew. But it's a palindrome. It could be read from right to left and from left to right, the same thing. But the meaning of the name Nathan, is giving, or he who gave in the past. And being a palindrome to me signals that when you give someone something, you get back. You gain. You actually by giving you get a lot back. That's one thing. And the second thing is that in every crisis there's also an opportunity. And to me, my journey was about healing myself by healing others, and helping strong people be stronger and taking care of themselves, and helping communities bounce back from devastating situations. And I've worked all over the world, and I still work all over the world. But again, it's the realization that by doing so, you can grow. Because today we talk not only about PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, we also talk about PTG, post-traumatic growth. And it turns out that what doesn't kill me really makes me, or can make me, stronger if it is being used or executed in the right way. And to me, this learning and this journey was about finding and connecting to the pain inside myself as a way to understand the pain of others who I've worked with. And it's interesting because one of the phrases that comes back again and again and again among combat veterans in the UK and in other places, in the US, all over the world, is that if you haven't been there, you cannot understand it. And so many times, I mean, there aren't a lot of psychologists who have actually been to combat and carry those scars themselves. And so you sit with a client, and they said, well, I can't talk about this because you will never understand. And I was always said, yes, but I do understand because I was there. And then with one wound touching the other wound, that's where the process of healing starts.
Yeah, people often say to us, how do you prepare to be ready for a crisis situation. For us, we were almost killed in the Ivory Coast, and people would say, well, how do you prepare to be ready in those situations? And we say, well, there are things you can do that can help to prepare you, but you never really know how you will respond until you are in that situation. And so I guess that speaks to some of what you're talking about. And your journey led you on to then being in charge of a recruitment process, as well as being a psychologist. And you talk about looking for people with the whole package. And I'm sure there were things that you changed to improve the system and the way it all worked. Can you talk about maybe a few of the things that you thought, these areas, these could be improved to be able to help the people, but also what is that whole package? What did you see in people that you thought you would be able to handle the stress and the strain, the rigors of this lifestyle, to be able to handle it both during but also post-service?
Well, first of all, just as a side note, and a comic stop, I remember reading from, I think it was Royal Navy officers, they get quotes, or they sometimes get feedbacks from their soldiers. So someone wrote about an officer that he's got the whole 6 packs, but lacks the plastic thingy that holds it all together. So let's talk about, for a minute, let's talk about the whole package. So, I think the most important thing is personality, but personality in the sense of having a very, very strong core that can, sustain and take a lot of pain and a lot of uncertainty. And I'm talking about the core because it's a bone that a muscle can be grown around it, because, and give it more substance. They have to be able to attach with the other members of the team, because the team, the power of the team is much more than the sum of its parts, and it's all about relationships. So they need to be able to attach and while being able to detach. While fighting, they have to attach to one another. That's one of the it's almost it almost does. You think about it and say detachment. Well, yes, it works together without a conflict, by the way. And then they have to be very smart and being able to weigh the situation, make the right decisions, but make those decisions under stress. Because at the end of the day, we are training. There are so many things that we can train by doing this protocol again and again and again until your muscles remember how to do it. You don't have to think about it too much. So we can train certain protocols that in an instant, when I understand that I have to, strive to engagement and get that bullet in the right place, I'm going to do it. But when that time comes, there's an instant in which you might freeze, you might flee or run away, and we need that fight reaction. We need the warriors to be very, very capable of getting it right the first time. And there will always be a first time, and it's very hard to know in advance how that is going to play out. So every procedure and protocol that can be trained in advance, we do it. We do it all the time, and we try to mimic the battle, conditions as much as we can. But training is always training. No one shoots back at you, and when you find yourself for the first time or for the first times under real fire, some people function very well. Other people don't function at all. Yeah. And we try to play with that percentage and to get it to the highest peak that we can. Now, the thing is that the whole reaction, the stress reaction that we have when our life is endangered, adrenaline, cortisol, fight, freeze mechanisms inside our autonomic nervous system and all that, what it usually does is it dissects or almost dissects our frontal cortex. That's where we think and we make informed decisions. And it gets us into something that is very, very, very focused and very, very, not complicated. It's very hard. You can't think about philosophy when you're under fire, and you shouldn't, by the way. But having said that, and when you enter a house in the Palestinian-controlled territories and you're after the bad guys, and there are children in there, and you have to decide in an instant of a second who you're aiming at, and if or not you're pulling that trigger, and you don't want to hurt a child or someone who is uninvolved. So those decisions need to be made in a flash of a second, and the mistakes could be very, very, very. This is something that could, that you would carry for your whole life of harming someone that was not meant to be harmed. And it doesn't really matter that there's a context, and that if you don't do, you don't err. If you don't err, you don't learn. It happens. So I'm a believer in very, very, I would say, strategically developed and tested training protocols that we know that work. And we always check ourselves in hindsight and see what worked and what did not work. And because some of the things that were done for many, many years were just not effective, not efficient, so we changed them. And I believe that today, the very, very high level of professionalism and fighting capacity is there because we erred and we learned, and we do it better today.
Wow. Well, as we draw this to a close, I want to read what to me was the climax of the story and the hope of the story, really. I mean, just such an incredible journey you take us on in the book, and they've unpacked for us now. So I want to read this. During these dives, I was focused on the mission, not allowing other thoughts or emotions to sneak into my mind. This time was different. I thought, and this is afterwards, and you're on the beach, I think, and what if I get cramp in my foot? What if I can't swim? I'm totally alone here, and there's no one who can help me. These thoughts were accompanied by an emotion I had long forgotten. I was suddenly afraid. It was like meeting an old friend, a companion who had been lost and was now knocking on my door. It was almost joy for me to realise that this was happen. Welcome home, old buddy, I heard myself saying. I was alive and connected to my inner feelings, and it was okay.
Yotam, thank you so much. We so appreciate you taking the time to share with us, to be with us. Hopefully we can have you back again. We can dive into some more specifics about some of the stuff.
Dive into some. Well done.
Look, I didn't even realise. Anyway.
Okay. Couldn't let that pass.
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If it inspired you, please rate us and subscribe on Apple or Google Podcasts, Spotify, or another podcast platform.